Joined now by Rick Bozich from WDRB.com. How are you, sir?
Good. Getting ready for the real start of college football season. And we've been talking about for months, for me, there's it's a very interesting 3 nights in a row. You got Jeff Brom and Purdue against Penn State tomorrow night. They're a small underdog, I believe, but seem to be a little bit of a trendy pick. Friday night, obviously, Indiana plays. I'll be up there. I'll see you up in the old press box. And then Saturday, Louisville plays at Syracuse, where surprisingly they're only a 4.5-point favorite against a team they've beaten 71-3 the last 2 seasons. I don't understand that. And Kentucky, without 2 starters, will play against Miami of Ohio.
Oh, Kentucky's the only easy opener. Purdue, Penn State, that ought to be a fun game. Penn State, not ranked, which is very unusual for them, especially I keep saying this, they've got a 4-year starter at quarterback, man. I can't believe that, that they have that, but obviously they're lacking in some other areas. Maybe we'll find out, but I think Purdue knocks off. Purdue always has that big game deal whether it's Ohio State and Jeff Brom, from a coaching standpoint, I'm sure he gets jacked, but he doesn't get nervous. He's been in these moments so many times as a player, much less as a coach, as an assistant coach and as a head coach. He loves these moments. And I would maybe be surprised if Purdue doesn't knock off Penn State.
Yeah, Jeff Brom's a big preparation guy. This is the ultimate preparation game you've had since all of last season to get ready for it. And, there's a ton of pressure on Penn State. Let's remember last year, James Franklin threw his name in the hat for LSU and Southern Cal, and pretty sure he got his salary jacked up there pretty high, and they didn't have a very good year. He's also the coach that stuck with Clifford and watched Will Levis go to Kentucky, where he's now considered by most people a better quarterback. And he's coming in with an unranked team. And if they lose, I mean, that's a rabid fan base. And they see themselves as being several notches below Ohio State now and probably a notch behind Michigan. Michigan moved ahead of them last year. That's a ton of pressure on Penn State in this game. My only question about Purdue is every team loses guys, but they lost 2 studs. Karlaftis has been really good for the Chiefs in the preseason. Looks like he's going to be a great NFL player. And David Bell was a phenomenal receiver for Purdue for 3 years. Plus Milton Wright, the kid from Louisville, who probably would have moved into the number 1 receiver slot, is no longer on the team. So that's some major holes that Jeff needs to fill, and Brian Brom, the offensive coordinator. But I agree with you. I think Purdue is going to win the game.
And that brings up some similarities with Indiana. They lose Micah McFadden, who made the 50-man 3 roster as on the NFL team. On the other side, Peyton Hendershot makes it with Dallas, but they didn't use him. He didn't.
Well, it was there all year last year. That guy needs every game.
And I said, so you had an NFL tight end that didn't get used much. Now, he did drop some passes, but it makes you, and you have an NFL linebacker, and you have to ask yourself, why were you 2-10? But that goes on to deeper stories.
To me, it's a monstrous game for Indiana. I mean, we've talked about this also now since spring football. You squandered all the buy-in, all the excitement, all the buzz you had a year ago. And people right now have either tuned out or they're on the fringe of saying, I'm going to watch the first game and see how it goes. And you're playing, with Northwestern beating Nebraska. Illinois, one of the 2 or 3 worst teams in the other division. You get them at home, and I know they look good against Wyoming, but Indiana has to change the vibe around the program. They have to win the game. And a close loss would be maybe tolerated, but if they get beat the way they got beat last year in all those Big Ten games, it's going to get dismal right off the start.
Who's in a well? I think I know the answer to this. I was going to say, who's in a worse place, Tom Allen or Scott Frost?
Scott Frost is in a worse place because his bio
every game, because they're talking about him every quarter. Forget about every game; it's every quarter they're following him.
Yeah, and he made that decision on the onside kick and got blasted nationally, and people are already calling for his job. He's number one on the hot seat list, and they got 78,000 or 80,000 seats to fill out there, and they used to be national championship contender, and now they've drifted to pretty much irrelevance. So there's more on him. But and I'll say this, I'll tell you right now, if Indiana goes into Lincoln and beats Scott Frost, I think his buyout goes down the next day. That will be his last game as the coach at Nebraska.
I guarantee you. I've said that because, and that sounds crazy. We have to wait to see what happens Friday night, but it is a possibility because Indiana, if they win the first game, they definitely should be 3-0 and going to Cincinnati with a shot to get some. That would be unbelievable momentum. Then you would be 4-0 going to Lincoln. Whew. Yeah, that would be.
That's another game I'm really curious to watch. Cincinnati, I think, plays at Arkansas. I think it's at Arkansas. I know they play Arkansas. Whether it's in Fayetteville or not, I don't know. But that's a fascinating game. I think Arkansas is favored by 6 or 7, just to see how good they are. I mean, everybody's given Cincinnati a lot of love. They lost 10 dudes, I think, to the NFL draft or in NFL camps, including their 3 or 4 very best players. The DB was a high pick, Sauce Gardner. Desmond Ritter's been decent for the Falcons at quarterback. They're doing the same game that so many coaches are doing right now, is not naming their starting quarterback. So there's a lot of uncertainty around Cincinnati, but that's a game I want to see how good Cincinnati is.
Yeah, they play Arkansas, as you said, at Arkansas, which is ranked number 19 right now, this Saturday at 3:30. So that'll give you an opportunity to see what they have. And then they have their two non-cons. Well, their entire season's basically like non-con. There's that. But I'm looking forward to football being back, period. We met with the coaches, the coordinators this week, even Scott Dolson. They were all there, and Tom Allen. There's a lot of pressure going on him personally because he got the contract moved up, extended, and with, like you mentioned, all the goodwill and all of that just poof evaporated just that quickly last year. A lot of pressure on him to keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of pressure on him to show that they've actually improved the offense. I mean, I believe that in conference games last year they averaged 11 points per game. I mean, this is an era where you got to average 25 to 30, man. So they've got all, except for the offensive line, which wasn't good. It's all new dudes, and I'd be shocked if it's not Bozich. I think he's got to be the pick. You want to see how good Sean Shivers is. Is the kid named Henderson, the running back from Josh Henderson?
Yeah,
North Carolina. Is he
Emery Simmons, the wide receiver?
Line out. You want to see how good Cam Camper is.
You go to WDRB.com. Rick's got an article up, and he's got all these guys listed. You've got Bozich, Sean Shivers, Josh Henderson, Emery Simmons from North Carolina, wide out from North Carolina, Addison Colby from Tennessee, a wide receiver, Tevis from Cal, a defensive tackle, Jackson from UCLA, a defensive end, Bradley Jennings from Miami, a linebacker. Listen to those names. And Jared Casey from Kentucky, a linebacker. But every one of those schools that these guys have come from are SEC, ACC, Pac-12, ACC, SEC. These are all coming from programs that play big time. So there should definitely be some help on the way for Indiana.
Yeah, and most of them, I went back and looked, they were legitimately highly ranked recruits. And Casey, the linebacker from Kentucky, was the number 1 ranked recruit in his class in 2019. He initially committed to Oregon and then decommitted and went to UK. I'm pretty sure Miles Jackson was a highly ranked recruit. He wanted to go out and play for UCLA. Jennings, I think, isn't he a fifth-year guy who played quite a bit at Miami? I mean, I'm not sure any of them are going to be like difference makers, but I think they all, what Indiana needs is them all to be solid, dependable guys. That can stay on the field and be counted on to make basic plays. The difference makers, in my opinion, are going to have to be on defense. Mullen at cornerback is back healthy. We saw how good he would be. Jalen Williams can be a difference maker. He had a lot of picks a couple of years ago. That's the stat we come back to that was such a dramatic fall off last year where they were a great turnover margin team in 2020, and they were one of the worst in the country last year in turnover margin. You would hope this year it would gravitate towards the middle of the pack instead of you don't expect a year like 2020 is extraordinary and there's some luck involved, but you can't have it be what it was last year because the other thing is because you have an offense that can't sustain drives, and when you have an offense that can't sustain drives, you can't put them in terrible field position, and secondly, you have to have a team that can deliver some explosive plays. And they had very few explosive plays last year. So if you can't sustain drives and you don't have any explosive playmakers, you get the kind of offense Indiana had last year. But I don't know. Last year was just so, when the way they were getting beat by Rutgers and Purdue, and it's just hard to forget how non-competitive they were in a number of those games.
Well, one of the things that I kind of forget about too that I didn't mention earlier, I talked about Micah McFadden being in the NFL, but the defense, that was I think that was kind of an anomaly. They had the talent to be way better than they were on defense, but they had the talent to be way better than they were on offense because their quarterback from last year is now starting at Washington. Their tight end is now in the NFL. So that's the stuff that I'm talking about. But they didn't, as you mentioned in your piece, they didn't have the line to use it that much.
I think two things. I think the defense at some point got discouraged because they
were always in a horrible position.
Always in a horrible position. They knew the offense couldn't score. And I also think, the way he left so quickly for a lesser job, Charlton Warren at some point, it seemed like he checked out as the defensive coordinator when you read those stories in the aftermath, like his family never moved to Bloomington and he lived in a camper or something. Like that doesn't really deliver a lot of, enthusiasm to the troops that your defense. And he didn't call the kind of defense that Tom Allen likes to run. And we see the response in two different ways. A, Tom Allen is now heavily back involved in the defense. And B, the guy they replaced him with is Chad Wilt, who's more of a Tom Allen type personality. Charlton Warren was a secondaries coach, I believe, at Georgia. Hey, you got all 5 stars. You got all the dudes in the world there. If you want to just have a more methodical, disciplined approach at Georgia, you can do that. But that's not going to work at Indiana because you're not going to out-talent people most of the time. You have to scheme it up and you have to motivate. And that team last year, I thought they didn't play with the edge on defense that they played the year before. The year before they had some swagger. And last year, once they had some rough times, the swagger was gone.
And look at the takeaways. The takeaway difference was unbelievable. They did have a lot of injuries, not having Tywan Mullen for most of the year hurt and several other guys. But the defense just didn't do what it needed to do. We'll find out this year what that's going to be like. I know in the picks, you've got them going 4-8. I see them a little bit better than that. I don't know if they can get to 6-6, but if they can, it all rides on Illinois starting. It starts there. It starts and ends with this game.
How can you build a path to 6-6 if you don't beat Illinois? You're gonna you give them the two you give them are Idaho and Western Kentucky since they're both at home. They clobbered Idaho last year. Western Kentucky, watching the first game. They got some players, but they're not the team they were last year. Okay. Then after that, at Cincinnati, they're going to be an underdog. At Nebraska, they'll probably be a slight underdog. And then what's happening? I mean, what other games are they going to be favored the rest of the year? At Rutgers. Rutgers smoked them last year.
It
Maryland
depends
at
on, yeah.
home. I mean, there's not going to be many games the rest of the year that are even going to be favored, is there? I mean, I'm not trying to be, like I said, Captain Doomsday, but if you just look at the schedule, honestly, I mean, I don't think there's going to be 4 games that are going to be favored unless they win the first 3 and beat Cincinnati, then they could be. But that's taking a leap of faith I'm not ready to take.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. What else? What are you looking forward to starting with tomorrow night? I know the Purdue game's on, but without anything else that you're looking forward to seeing this weekend?
There's, I think, 3 big games. Notre Dame at Ohio State, and Buckeyes at favorite, I think, by 17 or 17 and a half. And I think they've pretty much set the bar this year as national championship or bust. Notre Dame first regular season game for Marcus Freeman, who's a former Ohio State player, new quarterback. I want to see that one. Georgia, I think, plays Oregon in Atlanta also on Saturday. That, is an interesting game because Georgia's the defending national champ, lost their defensive coordinator, Dan Lanning, and he's the head coach at Oregon. So that'll be interesting. And the third one is, for obvious reasons, as I mentioned earlier, the Arkansas-Cincinnati game. I want to see how good Cincinnati is. Cincinnati was the darlings of college football last year, and now they got to do what the really elite programs do. Is doesn't matter which guys you lose, you're still good the next year. You're still at least a top 25 team. Does Luke Fickell have Cincinnati in a position where he can sustain all those losses and still remain a top 25 team? And because Indiana plays them in week 4.
We will certainly find out, man. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday night under the lights.
Were you surprised? Scott Dolson said they're expecting 42,000. I mean, that's more than I thought.
But I wouldn't expect the AD to say much less. You've got to create.
Yeah, but you can't jack it up too high and then only have 35,000 show up because then you're going to look bad.
It is a night game. The only thing that worries me is that it's a Friday night game.
Right.
And, there's only 2 high schools in Bloomington, but that's probably going to if you're coming to the football game, I guess you're coming to the football game.
I think you'll lose some fans from Indianapolis. They're going to go to high school football games up there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's that. I didn't even think about that as well. So
what was the general takeaway just from his press conference? Was it good?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I asked him about the NIL stuff. Are they going to switch over to there? And he's very positive about where the program's going. He's very positive about everything, but he always is. But he also is acknowledging that there's challenges for them. But there was nothing negative that he mentioned that he talked about. But he was pretty open about everything that everyone asked him. And I think that he knows that basketball is coming, and that has to happen. I think in Indiana, basketball has to be good, or nobody gives a crap about anything else. It doesn't matter. So that has to be the focus, and I get that. That's why that every player, virtually every player on that team has an NIL deal with Hoosiers for Good, the big one. And I asked him about, is there a plan to start doing that for football? And of course, yeah, there is, but they can do one thing at a time. But how, affecting football is a lot different than how you can affect basketball. Hugely different, especially at a school like Indiana. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be. It'll be very interesting. To me, it's one of the most. To me, it's the most interesting. Well,
toughest challenge.
Purdue, Penn State, and Indiana, Illinois are 2 of the most 5 or 10 interesting games on the card this weekend.